Features of the Cherokee Indians. Greetings. Today, we will talk about the indigenous inhabitants of North America who have succeeded in many areas of life. We will talk about the Cherokee tribe. What is the main condition under which a girl can be married to an Aboriginal lover? What is the trail of tears that makes Indians uncomfortable even today? What type of business Native Americans are now completely exempt from paying taxes in? Be sure to watch the video to the very end so you don't miss anything important. Tribal origins. As you have already guessed, the Cherokee tribe originated on the territory of the North American continent. It happened several hundred years ago. It is known that the Indians originated from the Iroquois. This fact is based on the fact that their languages practically do not differ from each other. For the first time, the Spanish colonizers learned about the indigenous inhabitants. This happened in the 16th century. They were followed by the English and then the French. What was the surprise of the Europeans who got acquainted with the life and peculiarities of the Cherokee? It is not without reason that the Indians are considered one of the most civilized tribes who introduced their own language, writing, and even the Constitution. But first things first. Rich culture and socio-political system. Would you agree that having all the essentials to unite the people of a tribe is already progress? Well, that's exactly what the Cherokee natives did. It was not for nothing that they called themselves Aniunvia, which literally means chief people. Initially, the Cherokees were engaged in farming, hunting, and fishing. Also, the local people were engaged in building villages and cultivating the land. Then, within a few years, their own language was formed, which, by the way, even today is spoken by several tens of thousands of people. Although the overwhelming number of Aborigines fully mastered the English language. By the middle of the 19th century, the Cherokee tribe had formed a socio-political system. The Aborigines had their own constitution, existing legislation and government. It is worth noting the high level of education of the Cherokee, which once again proves the most civilized tribe among others. Few people know about why the tallest tree on the planet is called sequoia. It turns out that it is named after a Cherokee tribal chief. His full name is George Hess Sequoia. This man is known to the natives for inventing a written language for the language of the natives, publishing a newspaper in the language for the first time, and becoming the spiritual leader of the Cherokee. Although initially George Hess did not boast perfect knowledge and skills in literacy, finally there were planters among the Aborigines who had black slaves in their charge. Most likely, many of you know about the slave system, which was formed in the United States in the 17th century and lasted until the second half of the century before last. So, those very planters of the Cherokee tribe had up to several hundred slaves. Later, to accumulate capital, the natives were engaged in selling their own lands to the superior persons of the USA. The Cherokee concept of family and marriage. Separately, it is worth touching upon the subject of family relations between a man and a woman of the Cherokee tribe, because in this plan too, there are characteristic features. Let's analyze them in more detail. To begin with, the Cherokee treated the female half of the Cherokee tribe with deep respect. A woman was considered both the keeper of the hearth and the leader of the community, and all because the natives supported matriarchy. As for the male representatives, for many years they were considered brave warriors, able to protect the tribe from all sorts of attacks and threats. It was also men who became responsible for hunting. Marriage in the Cherokee Nation is consensual, and for a man to win the heart of his beloved, he must try. After the potential groom has succeeded, the marriage union between the newlyweds is concluded. In the future, it was women who became free because of the matriarchy. They could divorce without much effort if there was a discord in the family. It is known that Indians practiced polygamy. Did you know that a wedding in the Cherokee tribe can only take place when a girl is educated? This is probably the most important condition for future newlyweds. In fact, the natives make sure that their children are always educated. The North American Indians were related exclusively through the maternal line. Therefore, if a man married a white woman, the children born were no longer members of the Cherokee Nation. By the way, the upbringing of children is based on the fact that heirs from an early age are taught useful things that will certainly be useful in the future. Another interesting fact concerns obtaining citizenship in the Cherokee tribe. So, representatives of this people have the full right to take custody of children of completely different nations. This is allowed at the legislative level. Tough times for the natives. Do you remember the era of colonization, which lasted for several centuries? Unfortunately, it was the Europeans who affected the Cherokee population. Why this was the case, let's explain. First, as a result of contact between the Spanish colonizers, who were among the first to learn about the Cherokee, and the Indians, many diseases were contracted. As the saying goes, this was always and everywhere. The natives had not yet developed a strong immunity, which meant that the risk of catching a new disease from Europe was minimized. Second, the Cherokees and Europeans were fighting over territory, especially influenced by the events of 1776, when Americans defended the honor and freedom of their country. Out of desperation, the Cherokees joined the latter in order to avoid becoming dependent on the British Empire. Though later, the relationship between the Indians and the Americans could not be fully established. Ever heard of the Trail of Tears? Such a campaign was underway in 1830 when America passed the Cherokee Removal Act. The displacement of the Indians was done forcibly, and many natives suffered as a result. They also lost their own homes and suffered psychologically. This is quite obvious, for the Americans separated entire families. As a result, the Cherokees were relocated to Oklahoma. After that, the Indians rebuilt their lost culture and socio-political system, although they were only partially restored. Cherokee now. At the moment, the Cherokee tribe continues to exist and develop. The number of Aborigines is approximately 300,000 people. Indians live in the territories of North Carolina, Missouri, Texas, and neighboring states. In Oklahoma, Cherokee is not only the name of the tribe, but also the official language. Only nowadays it is spoken by a little more than 10,000 people. Who would have thought that the Cherokees would succeed so well in the economy that they would master the gambling business? This activity brings in fabulous sums of money. And although the Indians have only 6 gambling houses, but they are large establishments. For a minute, the Cherokees are completely exempt from tax obligations and other mandatory payments, which should go to the state budget. It is the gambling business that forms the basis of the entire economy of this nation. They occupied a special place in society along with men. How the Mayan women lived. Greetings. Today we will talk about the Indians who predicted the end of the world in the Vanillum century. We will talk about the women of the Mayan tribe. Is it true that representatives of the ancient civilization achieved a thorough deformation of the face and sharpened teeth? What revolution in relation to the sexes made the Maya, which amazes to this day? And what were the women of the tribe, considered the most jealous in those times, were capable of? Be sure to watch the video to the very end so as not to miss anything important. It will be very interesting and informative. Mayan Indians, who are they? Most likely, many of you have repeatedly heard about the Mayans. It is enough to remember the predictions of this people about the end of the world, which, fortunately, didn't happen. However, the Indians are remembered by modern society thanks to other discoveries and innovations. It is known that the Mayan civilization originated about 4,000 years ago in Mesoamerica. The Indians became famous thanks to the construction of majestic pyramids. Besides architecture, the most famous city is Chichen Itza. Maya succeeded in such spheres of life as writing, art, mathematics, astronomy, military strategy. The accuracy of the solar calendar invented by the Indians is amazing. Such a subject was used by other peoples inhabiting Central America. Did you know that the Mayans had specific standards of beauty and fashion? Information about deformed face shape, teeth sharpened to sharpness and strabismus, This is not a myth at all, as it may seem at first glance. In this regard, Indians, for starters, tried to straighten the forehead with the nose so that the latter doesn't protrude. For this purpose, both boys and girls from the early years of life fastened a board to the face tightly enough. As a result, the appearance of the Maya became quite different from representatives of other peoples and civilizations. Thus, not only the face, but also a skull of the child was deformed. If to look carefully at illustrations, it is possible to notice obvious differences in appearance of these people. Then the teeth were sharpened. They were sharpened to such an extent that they became like the teeth of predators. It is known that extra teeth could be removed and replaced with precious stones. Such actions were performed to give beauty to the female part of the population. Finally, the Maya adhered to the principle that strabismus is an indisputable sign of female beauty. Such defect, along with the above-mentioned defects, were achieved independently and from the early years of life. It happened in the following way. After the birth of a girl, several balls were placed on a stand. During the swinging, the child carefully watched each ball, and the more such objects were suspended, the faster the girl's strabismus developed. In terms of fashion, the Indians also had their own taste. They painted their bodies with numerous tattoos, wore lush plumes depicting various creatures, and wore special capes made of jaguar skins. Nevertheless, women played a key role in Maya culture. Undoubtedly, representatives of the female sex had a high status in the society of Indians. So, about everything in order: sacred ministers, successful military leaders, and even rulers. The first thing we want to draw your attention to is the sacral meaning of women of the Maya tribe. For example, female representatives of the female sex were directly involved in rituals. It is for this reason they are so often depicted in ritual costumes. With the onset of night, Mayan women began to worship the moon. This astronomical object personified the feminine, while the sun was the responsibility of the male half of the population. In the dark time of day, men were forbidden to carry out ritual and other actions because all such duties fell on women. Also, the so-called ritual of bloodletting was often carried out. It was believed that this was the way to predict important events for the life of the people. Along with male warriors, representatives of the opposite sex also took part in fierce battles. This is quite logical, since all sorts of images of women's fights have been preserved. This can be explained by the high female status in the Maya tribe, and of course, without the right to become a full-fledged regent and even ruler of the Mayans. This right was reserved for women, and although in fact they became rulers in rare cases, there are still documented examples. Thus, there is information about the queens who ruled in the IV, 7th and the 8th centuries AD. The most striking example is Ishkabul, who was given a special title, Mistress of the Snake Lords. Based on the name, one can guess about the belonging of the ruler to the so-called Snake Dynasty. At that time, this dynasty was considered one of the most influential in the Mayan civilization. In all such cases, women came from more noble and powerful families than their husbands. And so, to take the place of the spouse ruler for them was not very difficult. That's the secret. Almost nothing is known about the first wedding night. Perhaps the ritual was something similar to the African ritual. We have already told about it on the channel. Look if you missed it. Weaving. The only truly female occupation for Indian women was weaving. Specialized rooms were allotted for such activity. Plus, weaving was also practiced in the home. The bones for sewing found by archaeologists serve as undeniable proof. And what is most interesting, weavers became not only ordinary Maya women, even queens were engaged in this activity. So social status didn't play a special role here. Fabric made of cotton was used not only for its direct purpose, it was also present as an object for offerings and tributes. In this case, its value was much higher than for everyday use. In general, the women of the Maya tribe remained in the perceptions of contemporaries as the most real hard workers. Undoubtedly, they loved their work and brought what they started to the result. It is known that the female representatives of the female sex continued to work even at night if they did not have time during the day. Family structure, revolution, and distinctive features. It should be noted that it was the Mayans who made a revolution that concerns the family pattern between both sexes. And this is really true. Let's deal with this issue in more detail. In the Mayan civilization, all duties to the spouses were distributed evenly. Then there was no question that one of the spouses should do more work than the other. In this respect, there was complementarity of the sexes. As a result, the union of both spouses contributed to the formation of a single divine spirit. It was he who helped in the fight against the enemy, honored all ancestors, and could also cause heavy rain. The Maya were especially in need of precipitation when civilization was overtaken by drought in the period from 800 to 950 AD. As for the peculiarities of Maya family life, the following is known to date. First, adultery was considered a grave offense. Women who were indifferent to their spouses could pay with their own lives. Secondly, female representatives were considered one of the most jealous in the Mayan society. Each potential bride tried every possible way to charm the future groom with her beauty. Indian women, driven to despair, could without much hesitation take a man by the hair and hold him so that he would not fall into the race. What wedding traditions do Gypsies have, and how do newlyweds spend their wedding night? Greetings! Today, we're going to talk about weddings and the first wedding night of the Roma. Is it true that brides are given in marriage at a fairly young age, and after the age of 19, they are considered old? How a girl's virginity is checked on her first wedding night? And for what reason, after the wedding celebration, the bride changes the white dress to a red one? Be sure to watch the video to the very end. It will be very interesting and informative. Marriages at a young age. If you have ever heard that the Gypsies give the bride in marriage quite early, it is indeed true. Marriage unions at a young age for such peoples have been practiced for many years. But what is the hurry and why does it happen this way? Let us understand in order. First of all, the age when a bride is given in marriage is from 15 to 18 years old. Of course, there are cases when very young girls were married at the age of 10, 12. Such an age is chosen for a reason. Parents simply wish to free themselves from certain material obligations. And what can be done in this case? Correctly, to teach the future generation to live independently. Secondly, it is extremely important for the Roma that the bride keep her virginity before the wedding and that the groom is not addicted to alcohol abuse and other bad habits. Roma believe that it is marriage that can tame young people to family commitments and values. Otherwise, boys and girls will simply not find their place in life. Thirdly, the tradition of early marriage dates back to the past. At that time, as we know, the Roma were nomads, and the quality of medicine and living conditions left much to be desired. In order to protect the future generation from all sorts of ailments and to give all the essentials, marriage unions were concluded quite early. An interesting fact: if in today's conditions, a girl still failed to marry before the age of 19, in the following years she is considered old and therefore not needed by anyone. That is why it is very important for Roma not to miss this moment. Preparation for the wedding celebration. We draw your attention to the fact that Gypsies prepare for the upcoming wedding in advance. Gypsy people do not spare money for treats, which are then served on the wedding table. It is extremely important to diversify the menu so that in the end, everyone is satisfied. On the table must necessarily be present hot dishes, appetizers, and of course, alcoholic beverages. Only get drunk is contraindicated because the abuse of hot drinks is tantamount to disgrace in the Romani people. Plus, the parents of the newlyweds try to cook themselves and bring something to the feast. Mostly, it is salads and pastries. If suddenly you thought that there are not so many guests at the wedding ceremony, we assure you. They are so many that the number of invitees is sometimes up to 300 people. Guests come from everywhere, and it is extremely important to provide them with overnight accommodation. And all because a Roma wedding lasts up to 3 days. It goes without saying that suitable rooms are booked in advance, outfits for the newlyweds are selected, and there is also the preparation of interesting programs for all present. And another very important point, all expenses are borne by the groom's relatives, whereas the bride's parents are responsible for the dowry. The sums are quite impressive, so this issue is decided long before the wedding ceremony. Someone begins to slowly save money, someone asks relatives and friends, and someone takes money on credit, shortly before the first wedding night arrives. Before the bride and groom have to be alone together, the real party begins. Except that everyone is having fun except the bride. Traditionally, the girl sits at the table and cries. The latter will have to part with relatives and henceforth obey the future spouse. That's all the explanation for such a sad female image of the Gypsy people. Perhaps you once noticed that guests and newlyweds never sit at the same table. This is also true. A separate table is provided for the young people and another for those present. The Russian and Romani peoples have one similarity when conducting wedding ceremonies. The newlyweds are obliged to kiss an icon from the hands of their parents. After that, the bride and groom taste the brought karavai. The well-known word bitter and dancing with everyone in a row are not even foreseen by the Roma. Male and female parts are distributed on different sides of the hall, and touching each other is also not allowed. Roma also do not go to the registry office, since divorce is not provided for in the families of this people. Orthodox Roma, as it should be, are married in church, the first wedding night. And here it is, the most important moment on which the fate of the newlyweds depends, the first wedding night. It is customary for Gypsies that it should take place not after the end of the holiday, but in the midst of it. For this purpose, the bride and groom temporarily leave the relatives and gathered guests. They seclude themselves in a separate room. As soon as everything is successful, you can officially declare, now it is a real husband and wife. But how to realize that the marriage was successful and now young people have crossed the threshold of adult independent life? As you remember, we talked about the fact that the bride, before entering into a marriage union, must preserve her innocence. That is why it is necessary to make sure that the girl is a virgin. For this purpose, the Roma have two generally accepted ways of verification. Method No. 1. Young people, accompanied by matchmakers, 2-3 women, go into the room. The matchmakers do not go inside, but wait outside the door. Intimate intimacy of the bride and groom begins. As soon as the process comes to an end, the women take away the sheet with the girl's blood. This sheet is then shown to everyone in the room, so people are once and for all convinced of the innocence of the newlywed. Method No. 2. The next method is quite specific and difficult in psychological terms for the bride. The newlyweds still with 2-3 in-laws leave the hall. Only this time they change places. The groom remains outside the doors and the bride and her women go into the room. This time the girl is taken of her virginity by her own hand. One of the women wraps a sheet around her hand and strips the bride of her innocence. Unfortunately, sanitary and hygienic conditions are not observed here, and the girl can easily get a psychological trauma. After performing such a rite, the result is demonstrated to the relatives. Results. It is worth noting that if there is no blood, and the bride has already once entered into intimate intimacy, then there is an expulsion of the latter together with her relatives. In this case, the marriage is considered invalid. The probability that the failed bride will be able to find another groom is extremely small. If the girl proved to those present her chastity, then the wedding banquet continues. The celebration acquires completely different shades and significance. The bride changes from a white dress to a red one. This means that she is no longer a young girl, but a real woman. From now on, newlyweds are considered full-fledged relatives who are obliged to divide property in half as well as bring up children. A procedure called fraternization takes place when incisions are made on the hands of the newlyweds, blood joining together. The Gypsy wedding ends with the fact that the spouses are given money, gifts, and precious jewelry. The newlyweds without strangers begin to seclude themselves. So, passes already a real wedding night. Conclusion. Thus, the Roma are characterized by wedding traditions that go against other nationalities. Their marriage occupies a key place in the lives of future spouses. Hence, such close attention and careful preparation for the celebration.